So once again, hello and welcome to Let's Talk About It, a podcast created by The Fuse, an outreach initiative within the College of Applied Studies and recorded here on campus at the Elliott School of Communication. I am Bobby Berry. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing religion. What does it mean to different people? How does it shape different viewpoints around the world? We will be talking to professors and other folks, especially students, and getting their perspective on what does religion look like to them. So joining us today is Dr. Tella, an associate professor of religion, and Ricardo Harris, the executive director of GEAR Up and the pastor for the Resurrection Community Church here in Wichita, Kansas. So welcome Dr. Tella and Ricardo to the table.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. So we're going to talk about religion. So to get us started off, how would each of you define religion? And I'm going to start with Dr. Tella first. How would you define that?
Well, religion is just notoriously difficult to define. And talking about what students think it means is often a good way of approaching the discussion because everybody has assumptions about the concept. But in general, I would say religion encompasses some sense of the sacred, holy, forces beyond the human realm, and interactions with these that touch on fundamental aspects of human life, identity, belonging, traditions, customs, beliefs, and things that guide the way people live, ethics, sense of right and wrong, and also those really, deep questions of purpose and meaning about existence and those kinds of things.
And so the thing that I find really fascinating is because the conversation of religion, spirituality, and how that looks and how people interact and engage and how many folks can identify as the same religion but still engage with it differently. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have that conversation today. So Ricardo, how would you define religion?
I define religion a couple of different ways. I love Doctor's definition of religion. It was very detailed. It was great. Mine is not going to be that great. It revolves around faith. To me, it is faith. Growing up, I thought about religion, and I thought about religion being church. That's the first thing that came to mind. Mm-hmm. Is church, and that's what it is for most people. Is church. I was speaking somewhere one day, and someone told me at the end of my speech. They said, "Well, I'm not very religious," and I was taken back. The reason I was taken back was because I don't consider myself, even though I'm a pastor, I don't consider myself as being this religious zealot, that's bouncing things and judging people. Most of the time when people think about religion, they think of it being judgmental, in that, this is the only way to do it, and if you're not doing it this way, then you're in the wrong.
Yeah. That's interesting to me because something that should feel welcoming and embracing sometimes does not, based off of those assumptions that people place on religion and spirituality. I teach a diversity class, and we talk about religion, and it's really interesting to hear those viewpoints of how we as a society have allowed religion to be something that is often the great divider, if you will, amongst a lot of other things within our world. And finding ways to really bridge that gap and bring people together. And I think that is a struggle that sometimes we've faced within religion, which is really interesting to me. But so when we think about that, and then going to get a little bit more personal with you two, you both play roles here at Wichita State. So if we can just talk about that a little bit. So Dr. Tella, how long have you been at Wichita State, and what does your role consist of?
Well, I've been teaching in the religion program since for about 10 years, and then I became full-time in 2017. And I teach mainly courses in introduction to the Old Testament, introduction to the New Testament. But one thing I wanted to say also when we talk about religion is that it's really, in the study of religion, it's not confined to Christianity, And even though I think a majority of students here in my classes identify as Christian, and by that I'm talking about Christian, all traditions, not the way that it's sometimes used as Christians as opposed to Catholic, which is a usage I hear here that was kind of new to me when I came to this part. But anyway, and so in the study of religion, you have to really be careful not to impose concepts from one religion on another. And even a word like faith might not fit into all kinds of areas that should belong within the field of religion. Even the word religion isn't really fair to certain traditions that feel like that might be a Western way of looking at things. So, it's really interesting that way to kind of try to peel away some of those. And talking about role, I see myself a little bit as sort of a place where people can feel like what they identify with is being studied, but they also get to kind of open their minds more.
So what made you want to decide that would be your area of interest from an academic standpoint? What drew you to that?
Yeah, I think I could have done many different things. I'm super interested in all kinds of things, exploring, everything that has to do with human behavior, basically. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that biblical studies, which is my specialty, it combines everything, really: history, languages, literature, any kind of human behavior really is recorded in some way in these texts, and rituals, and just culture, all the things I'm interested in can get combined, and that's how I ended up with it. Probably also because I had some teachers who I liked. That's often how it works.
Oftentimes.
But I was always going to do some kind of study and exploration.
That's fascinating to me. And Ricardo, how long have you been? Well, I know how long you've been around. But how long have you been here at Wichita State?
9.5 years.
9.5 years.
Yeah.
All right. And what does your role consist of?
I am the executive director of Wichita Gear Up.
Mm-hmm.
Gear Up stands for Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we help students get ready to go to college. That's what we do. We start with them when they're in the 7th grade, and we work with them all the way through their first year of college. So the great thing about it is that the students are familiar with the staff, and we build relationships, strong relationships, and we introduce them to the concept or the idea of going to college. College is not on a lot of people's mind. They're not even thinking about it. They don't even think that they're capable of going to college. And so we expose them to that possibility.
So as I said earlier, you are also a pastor.
I am.
So
I am.
So you have multiple roles.
I do.
So tell us about how you navigate being a pastor,
yeah.
in addition to your work here, and what led you to want to even be a pastor?
What led me to want to be a pastor? I didn't want to be a pastor. I'll tell you that right now. I did not. I wanted to be an attorney. That was my goal. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna go to law school, and then I'm gonna get married at 28. I'm gonna have kids at 32. I had my life planned out, everything like that. But it didn't work. It didn't work out that way. But what made me want to be a pastor, it was a calling, and that's what it is. I believe in people. I believe in people being the best that they can be. And so how do I motivate them, and how do I encourage them to be the best that they can be? I share the good news. I share, the Bible. I share experiences, and my life experiences have been up and down, many experiences. But in doing that, I'm committed to that. Like I said, I didn't want to be a pastor. That was not what I said. Hey, I'm going to be a pastor. I didn't. And I'm thinking about the religion classes that I took in college. Go back and look at that transcript. I didn't do too well. I didn't. I really didn't. I was not. That wasn't the focus of mine. I didn't care.
So with that, wanting to impact folks and make them to provide them with the opportunities to be the best versions of themselves, realistically speaking, what is it like for you as a pastor, and what is that feeling knowing that you are the person that some people look to help to guide them in that process?
The weight sometimes is heavy.
Yeah.
It is. It really is to carry that, and in the influence. It blows my mind. I love seeing when the light bulb goes off in people's mind, when they get it. I taught high school math for a number of years, and when the students would get it, They would come in, they hated math, and they hated their life. They hated, I know I'm going to fail this class. By the end of the year, they're excited about what's next in math. So opening up the opportunity, the idea of, being able to be good at something. And so that's the same thing that I do in talking to people. And I'm not a traditional pastor though.
Yeah.
Not at all. So traditional pastor, I'm going to get here and I'm going to say things this way and I'm going to do this way. That's not me. I'm very, very different in that regard. But I love hearing people talk, and I love guiding them through what it is that they're saying.
Absolutely. And Dr. Teller, what is it like for you to have, because there's still a decent amount of weight and responsibility as you guide students through their programs and through your classes. So what does that feel like for you to be in the front of the classroom and trying to teach our students about the history, the culture, everything that's kind of intertwined into what you do? What does that feel like for you?
Well, it's an honor, and it's also a great opportunity, and I love sort of seeing the process that often takes place when students bring, their expectations to the class and background, and then maybe make discoveries that they didn't think they would do. And one of my kind of goals is to, in a way, let students feel like they have the tools and skills that they need to read the Bible or hear certain points of view from a religion, and not have to think, oh no, what am I supposed to think about this? But have the skills to themselves kind of integrate into their own way of thinking and believing, and having that authority kind of in themselves and ability to do those things. And a lot of it is actually also general education skills, knowing how to read a text, having the skills to see what it says and make, draw conclusions. And so it's a skill as well. And I love seeing that process kind of unfold every time.
Yeah. One of the things that I find really interesting is religion has always been such a hot topic, in society and many other places. But however, people are very uncomfortable to speak about it. Dr. Teller, why do you think that is? Where does that level of uncomfortability come from?
I think it's because religion feels very personal to people, and many are afraid to be judged, like was mentioned earlier, and maybe because they have been, or they've also been cultured kind of to speak about religion in certain ways that they don't feel like it's their own. It's what they hear their pastor speaking, and they haven't learned that language.
Right.
So it's like, sometimes people have antagonistic, traumatic experiences, so they get antagonistic. And it's not really thought about so much as a topic to kind of converse about or know about. It's thought of as something that's private, even though it's so out there in the public. Yeah. And it kind of gets taken for granted until there's a controversy, and we don't have that kind of a language to talk about it. I think one of the reasons is that religion is not taught as a normal subject in public schools, like English or social studies or history.
Correct.
And if it had been, I think, and then you get to university and you're supposed to be able to talk about it. Whoa, right? How do we do this? It feels like it's, personal and related to, if you have a background in religion, whatever it is, that's what it relates to. It's not like this sort of field of discussion that we can have together. And so even though it's really necessary, I think, now to have that kind of a civil discussion about different religious positions and be able to talk about it, because it's really impacts political developments.
I wonder if that will change. I wonder with the heavy emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only within society, within our nation, within our community, I wonder if those conversations will start to look different in our public school system over time. I'm just curious. I just wonder if we'll start to see that. Ricardo, same question for you. Why do you feel like a lot of people are uncomfortable speaking about religion?
Dr. Teller talked about it being personal. It is personal. It's certain things that you don't share.
Yeah.
You don't want to offend anybody. So there's certain things. I don't advertise. I don't walk around with a sign that says, "Hey, I'm a pastor. This is what I do." You know I'm a pastor because I've shared that with you in our personal conversation. But that's not something that I do. We don't. Religion or spirituality doesn't come up in a normal conversation with me. If someone brings it up, then it's open, and that's how I've done my job. You know what I'm saying? Usually people talk about this separation of church and state to make sure you don't talk about this and you don't talk about that. I don't beat anybody over the head with any of this stuff. I don't. I think that the opportunity to learn about yourself, I learned more about me through my relationship with God. So that was a personal thing. That was a religious experience in my relationship with God, in my faith. So.
And it's interesting you said the notion of separation of church and state. However, you pastor a church and you work for the state, which is kind of ironic.
It is.
So what has that been like, and has there been any challenges with you navigating working for a public institution but still feeling that you are connected and being true to your faith?
I haven't been challenged by that. I'm very careful in the words that I use when I'm speaking to students. It's usually it's educationally driven, but I speak that same way in church as well though. When I'm preaching or giving a message, I share everything. So it's not challenging in that regard. So.
Dr. Teller, do you ever find it for you personally as a professor? Are you aware and very mindful of, teaching out of a book versus that of giving your own personal thought and input to the content? Does that line ever get strange for you?
Actually, I really believe strongly in public education as the best way to kind of make a fair playing ground and to reach equity and all that. So for me, I think actually a public institution is much better equipped than a private one to provide a space that's sort of safe for that exploration and that can be inclusive for everyone regardless of their background or lack of one. That's another arena to respect. And for me, actually, integrity as a person of faith demands the freedom to be able to explore that. And in a classroom, everything is allowed. You can talk about things you don't believe in. You just have to be able to know what the subjects are and move around in it. So it's kind of what's maybe most challenging to me is to try to come to terms with in the classroom or get across two kind of seemingly opposite tendencies. One, that it doesn't really matter what my background is when I'm teaching. That's what I always say. But at the same time, I keep telling students, you are who you are, and what you bring to the subject makes an impact. So then I have to be honest about at least where I'm coming from. But, I don't think I would be comfortable at teaching at an institution that had some very strong faith statement. That would be difficult for me. I don't think I could, that would feel constraining. And usually probably I wouldn't be accepted anyway at those institutions that do have a faith statement. So anyway, I really think that in order to know about belief systems other than your own, you have to really know your own in order to be true to yourself and to the other person or the people representing other points of view. So that's part of the search as well.
I love that statement that you made about being comfortable in the classroom enough to be able to have those opportunities to explore. And I love that approach because sometimes I guess, even for me as an educator, I feel like sometimes our students have been conditioned not to feel comfortable in the classroom. And I think a lot of our students have a hard time engaging, or sometimes it's the first time they've ever engaged differently because they're actually being asked, what do you think about this? How do you feel about this? How do you identify? And I think when we allow our students to be a part of that process and to be a part of those conversations, that's when learning then becomes an enjoyable experience for them.
And they learn who they are.
Yeah.
So in learning not only the material, I'm learning about me.
Exactly.
Yeah, it becomes real, you know.
Yeah.
It's like a real learning. It's not something you memorize for a test.
And I think those are the most impactful experiences in learning, because if you often ask anybody, us or students that we've had, what was your best experience? They're not going to say the exam that I took and, you know, that third chapter of the book that I read my sophomore year. They're not going to say that. They're going to say that professor had an impact on me, or this experience that I had in the classroom. And I think when I think we as a system understand that, I think education will look very differently. So kind of as we start to round out our conversation, and I'm going to bring this to you, Ricardo. When you think about spiritual wellness, generally people like to live a life of meaning and purpose, right? And so do you have any recommendations on how one can accomplish that goal of spiritual wellness? I think of wellness in the totality of many facets of one's life, right? And so that key aspect of spiritual wellness, which looks different for everyone. So for someone who's maybe struggling with that, what suggestions or recommendations would you have for them?
That is a wonderful question, because I think everybody reaches that point in their lives when they are wanting to be whole, and I know personally, I've done it several different times. There were many different waves in my lifetime, a lot of ups and a lot of downs. For someone seeking that, some would point them to, okay, here, find this church or find this book or find whatever works for you. Mm-hmm. It's not just one thing. God made us all different. The Bible says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So when He made all of us, nobody looks exactly like anybody else. Our fingerprints are very, very different. We're unique. And so what works for me may not work for someone else, may not work for you. Mm-hmm. And so finding what works is finding someone to talk to, someone, a mentor, someone that can give you some type of guidance is very, very important. And that's what I've had to do along the way. And in doing that, I didn't grow up in church. I went to Sunday school for a couple of years, and then the whole church experience, that was new to me. So my walk and my experience, my journey has been a journey of learning. And I still learn every single day. I'm learning every day. I'm learning about me. And as I learn about God, I learn about Jesus, which is important to me. I learn about me, more about myself.
Yeah.
Who I am, and love is the most powerful thing. Most time people use religion to divide. We say, oh, that's those people over there, and that's those people over there. We use them as dividing places. Mm-hmm. They believe this, and so they're wrong, and I'm right. No. Where are you in your life? I believe that God has a plan for all of us.
Mm-hmm. So. There's a level of self-actualization that comes along with that process and that journey. And so this is going to be my last question for you, Dr. Tella. And you think about, religion has been around for many, many years. And as an individual who's in the classroom almost every day, what has been the most thought-provoking question a student has asked you based on religion?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was one of the ones I had to think about the most. And actually, my students' questions are always making me think and rethink almost everything I say when I teach and how to best approach subjects. But I think maybe the instances that have kind of impressed me the most are when students kind of take a chance to move beyond those assumed ideas and beliefs that they've grown up with in order to kind of almost become emancipated in a way, and to make their own path and become sort of integrated individuals. And when students have shared that process with me, I've really been deeply honored. For example, there have been students who have maybe overcome some kind of trauma associated with a repressive, harmful, or abusive ways that the Bible has been used to, justify repression of women or other things. In a way, a whole culture that you have grown up with that you might really need to depart from, and then what, right? Kind of. Or people whose gender and sexual identities have been unacceptable in their religious backgrounds, but who have worked through that and not, the left religion that seemed to be maybe at first the only option, but kind of reintegrated themselves and their religious faith and who they are as people, basically. When I've been allowed to kind of know about those things and students have opened up to me, maybe not in the classroom, but that has really been the most rewarding to me.
I love that. That was really interesting, profound to me, honestly. The fact of being part of those experiences, and I know you personally, so I know what that also, being a part of those experiences as people go through that process of their self-actualization and their self-awareness, and how it's someone inviting you into an aspect of their life that, once again, we don't talk about. So for someone to open up to you and to bring you in, to let you be a part of their process, that it feels different, and it allows you to feel connected to that person in a way that you probably never could have, especially even in the classroom or some of the work that we do elsewhere. So once again, thank you both so much for being a part of this conversation. I'm really grateful that you guys are willing to be transparent and share personal stories related to the topic of religion. So once again, thank you guys so much for being here, and we hope to have you back at another time.
It's great being here.
Thank you.
All right, so now we'd like to take a little bit of a turn and have a different perspective, and I'd like to introduce you to Sonia Ahmed. So once again, welcome, Sonia, to the table.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And we're appreciative to have you here. So first off, I just want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, a little rapid fire here. So what's your name, what's your major, where you're from, and what is your current classification as a student?
Absolutely. So, like I said, my name is Sonia Ahmed. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. I actually have graduation coming up for myself.
Woohoo!
Yeah, May 15th.
Yes.
So close. So I'll be getting degrees in health science with minors in chemistry and biology, as well as an honors baccalaureate, which is kind of like a design your own degree through the honors college with concentrations in Spanish psychology and health administration.
So what do you want to do? Now I'm
That's a
fascinated.
good question. So I am pre-med. So right now I am so passionate about public health. And I also really, really want to work in primary care. I'm a very, person who's a lot more focused on vulnerable populations, communities in need, marginalized communities, and making sure that they have the health access they need. So basically, I think my advocacy from my public health side really matches with this desire to become a physician. So hopefully, upon graduation, I will be attending the University of Kansas Medical Center for my Master's of Public Health, and then hopefully go on to medical school right after.
Love it. So we'll jump into the conversation at hand, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about religion today and kind of what that looks like from a lot of different perspectives. So Sonia, if you feel comfortable, if you could at least tell me a little bit about what religion or faith do you identify with?
Absolutely. So I am Muslim, meaning that I belong to the religion of Islam. I'm actually from the subsect of being Sunni Muslim. So essentially what that means is, Islam has a lot of different sections, but we're known for predominantly 4. So the ones you hear in a lot of, news coverage, media, etc., is usually Sunni and Shia. And so I belong to the first, to Sunni, meaning that a lot of our primary principles politically align with what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the time at 7th century AD had established his political structure. We follow that, as well as a lot of the principles that come directly from his sayings, which are called hadith, and then, of course, the Quranic teachings from our holy book, the Quran. So that's kind of a lot of what differentiates us from, say, like the Shia subsect. And so I can't speak a whole bunch on that because I'm not a part of that particular subsect. But I will say that I know really the main difference comes politically as to who was the successor of the Islamic Empire after the passing of our beloved Prophet.
So with that being said, would you say that religion has always been a major part of your upbringing in life? And can you talk a little bit about what your upbringing consisted of?
Sure. So actually, I'm going to take a second to differentiate religion and spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my parents, I'm a first-generation college student, grew up, kind of touching the poverty line throughout my entire life. And so my parents, I was used to seeing them maybe for like an hour in the evening, usually right before going to bed, especially my dad. He left in the dark, came back home in the dark. I saw my mom a little more, but because of that, I never got to really see religion in practice. My parents took us to the mosque, over the summer. My mom used to take off on Friday so that we could go to Friday prayer during the summer. But in terms of the 5 daily prayers that are performed every single day, I never saw those in action growing up really from my own immediate household. And when I got older, when I got into middle school though, the time we woke up like 7 o'clock, right? Right before that, when we had to get ready for school, that was the time for the first prayer of the day. And then my mom used to be like, hey, you're already up. You should pray. Yeah. And I used to be like, okay, I guess, and so of course we knew how to pray. We grew up knowing how to pray, how to read Quran, and things like that, because the Quran is in Arabic, and so we learned Arabic at a very young age. Read that every year, completed it multiple times. Also read the translation in English.
Wow.
Just so that we knew really what we were reciting, what we were saying. And my parents really drilled that into me because of the emphasis they had on spirituality. So while they didn't have the time really to show us kind of like the religious ropes of this is, you should pray immediately for every 5 prayers and stuff like that, they always told us stories of the different prophets that we have in Islam, and really emphasized the stories and the values and the love that we should have for our faith, our religion, and God, of course, and our beloved prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so I think we really grew up with, Islam in our hearts, in the way we spoke, in the way we, interacted with our communities. But in terms of practicing religion, that I took upon myself more heavily when I got into high school. I really wanted to wear the hijab, like the head covering that a lot of Muslim women observe, and nobody else in my family wears a hijab. And the reason for that is because Islam actually is incredibly flexible. Excuse me. It's incredibly flexible. And what I mean by that is when you don't live in a Muslim-governed or an Islamic structure, politically, country, then none of the things in the Quran are obligatory towards you in the same way that they are for someone who lives in a Muslim majority or a Muslim-run country. So we live in the United States. Obviously, there's no religion associated with the political structure, because we have the separation of church and state. But so a lot of the practices that are mandatory are not necessarily the same here, because we can risk our lives, our livelihoods, our opportunities by declaring our faith. And we know that. So that discrimination does exist. My parents immigrated in the 90s. And so I think really in the early 90s, and so when they came to Wichita, Kansas, there were barely any Muslim families. And so it was really, really difficult really to transition into, yes, we should be publicly Muslim. And when I got to high school, I told and especially, this kind of started with when I started praying regularly in the mornings in middle school, I thought to myself, man, that means I can make the rest of the prayers, because by the time I got home from school, like 2 o'clock, that was the next prayer. So I was like, I can do this. And so I started praying, and I found so much peace and so much serenity, and, and I was just like, I want to wear the hijab, because the Quran says, this is something that we want men. Of course, men are commanded first in the Quran to observe modesty or hijab, and then the command comes to women. And so I was like, well, I'm doing something, so can I do it? And my parents pushed back a lot. And what happened essentially was my mom said, well, be consistent in your prayers. And if you are consistent in your prayers and you can really live out the values of hijab, which my parents taught us, which was, dress modestly without the head covering. And you had to make sure that you had hijab or modesty in 3 different areas before that. And that was in your tongue, meaning how you speak. Are you speaking ill of others? Are you backbiting? Are you gossiping about other individuals? Are you using, foul language? And The second was, what are you looking at through your eyesight? Are you seeing good things? Are you engaging? You're watching violence. What are you doing? And then, of course, the third, and probably one of the most important, was in your thoughts. Are you modest in your thoughts? Are you thinking ill? Are you, imagining foul things such as violence and all these other things that, are impermissible in Islam? You have modesty so that you carry yourself with purity and grace. If you can do these three things and establish your prayer, then you can wear hijab. So the senior year of high school, my senior year, right before my senior year, I decided to wear hijab, and my parents finally said okay. So that's when I became hijabi. This marks almost 5 years now in June.
It's really interesting because I teach a diversity class, and one of the areas that we cover is religion. And so I was reading this really interesting article that was talking about specifically how Muslim women apply less to jobs because if they do wear the head covering, that's easily identifiable. And meanwhile, we can't necessarily prove it. Technically, but Muslim women often feel like because of that, they often do not get the same job opportunities that maybe another woman who does not would. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. And another thing that was pretty interesting that you just had stated was the fact that as far as seeing someone practicing the religion, that was not something that you saw often.
Right.
So, typically when we think about religion, we think about spirituality, and we think about our upbringings, we often have a role model, if you will. So who was the individual that you would say played such a major role in your faith journey, if you will?
Absolutely. I would say my grandfather, may he rest in peace and give him mercy. He passed away earlier this year. And he was the spiritual guide of the family, of me, of literally anybody who asked. And he took a lot of time in his youth and also, as an adult to learn a lot about Islam. So for me, he was the equivalent of an Islamic scholar. For himself, he always just said he was a student. He was a student of faith. He's a student of God. And I think really he practiced. Of course he practiced. He also woke up with some of, in the middle of the night, we also have some nightly prayers that are not mandatory, not obligatory. He always woke up for those. Always woke up. And every time I saw him, he wouldn't ever tell anybody else to pray. He would just go and pray. And the reason for that was, if I tell somebody and they don't listen, that's another sin added to their plate. And he never wanted to do that. And so for me, I hung out with my grandparents every Friday, because I used to take them, especially when college started. I got really, really close to my grandparents. And because I made sure that I had that Friday time off so that I could leave and take them to Friday prayer. And so I would take them to Friday prayer, come back, hang out with them for 5 hours. And in that time, usually asked a lot of my curiosity-based questions that were spirituality-based, something I had read in the Quran, something I read otherwise to say, what's the story behind this? Or what's the reasoning? What's the principle that I'm supposed to take away from this story? And he answered a lot of my questions with grace, and I think really it was fun for him too that somebody so young was so inquisitive about the religion and about the faith. And so I think for me, he was definitely by far, and he was also the kind of man who literally lived out the values of Islam, literally the epitome of living out what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to submit to Allah and Allah alone, and to really take the time to say, this is how, as a human being, I recognize that this is how, what we call it in Islamic tradition, we call the ego nafs. And so what it means to control the nafs, to make sure that you're continuously humble, to make sure that you're a person who is cognizant of other people's feelings and their experiences and all of that. So I think really my grandfather was not only my spiritual advisor, he was my spiritual guide, and of course my teacher beyond everything.
And it's always so interesting to me because when we think about the role in which our elders play in our faith journey, that level of connectedness, which makes it feel a little bit more secure, if you will.
Absolutely.
And so, as you had stated, your time here at Wichita State University and you being in college and really embracing certain aspects of your faith. If you could take a step back and kind of look at the role of religion, if you will, in quotes, what has it been like for you as a young woman in 2021 to be practicing her faith so openly? What has that experience been like for you?
It's been by far, before anything, it's been a blessing. It's helped me handle a lot of the losses that I've been handed from life, and I think it's allowed me to remain so steadfast in my beliefs. I think a lot of the times in this day and age, being so proudly and loudly Muslim is tough, and I recognize that and I embrace that because I think whatever is meant to come my way will come my way, no matter what bigotry is taking place, no matter what discrimination is taking place. But what I will say is that it also makes me so nervous because, like I said, I'm the only person who identifies my family as Muslim. When I'm walking in a crowd, no one knows my family is Muslim. They know they're different. They don't know they're Muslim until they see me with them. And I think that's really hard sometimes for me to reconcile with, to say, am I putting my family in harm's way? Am I putting, like when I go with my parents somewhere, either for, job interview or for something like that, am I lessening their chances? If I'm at a doctor's visit, am I changing the physician or the provider's point of view because I'm sitting with them? And it's really hard for me to reconcile that, it's very possible that everybody in my family could be treated better, but they're not because I'm there.
So what is that weight? What does that feel like to you, and how do you navigate? And I mean, I can only imagine, because folks can't see you clearly. So when you are out in public with your family, your friends, and you have that feeling of, is the way I'm dressed contributing to the treatment in which they're going to receive? How does one handle that stress and that pressure every single day?
Good question. How does one? Yeah, I think it's something I'm still grappling with. It's something I still have to kind of remind myself that above all, Allah or God is truly the most powerful, and He controls all things, and He will keep my family safe. By no means will this commitment to faith, this devotion to faith, be the cause of, hopefully, of somebody else's harm. And so I think really just setting my intention to remind myself why I'm doing this, and I think why I'm doing this outweighs potentially any harm, and that's simply, for my love of God, this is why I do this.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways, while there's always that negativity, I think being someone who observes religion, someone who's a person of faith and is conscious and intentional about it, I think it inevitably gives off the sense of energy that other people are a little bit more cognizant about their own spirituality and about their own faith. And I've noticed that here at Wichita State, actually. I've had some really fun experiences with when, of course, I founded Mu Delta Alpha, the Muslim interest sorority here on campus. And when I was going through that process, some of the people in student involvement would come in and, make jokes and have a good time. And then, of course, there would be a slip up of saying, a bad word, quote unquote, right? And I remember so distinctly being apologized to. I wasn't in the conversation. They were just talking around me in the same room. And I remember that an individual literally apologized over and over again and literally said, "I'm so sorry for saying that." And I was like, I'm a college student. I hear these words all the time. A lot of my peers use them. It's not I don't have a problem. And they literally said, your essence as a person of faith makes me more conscious of how I'm presenting myself to you. And that made me feel so humbled that I could have even that kind of an impact. Yeah, of course, there's going to be people out there who are discriminatory and all of that. But then maybe as well I'm making a pretty decent impact on my community to say, as a person of faith, maybe take a look inside as well. So.
Absolutely, and that ties directly into my next question, is talking about your faith through the lens of a college student specifically. And so talk about your on-campus experiences and how you have utilized your faith to really change and or impact this institution. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So one of my joys of being at Wichita State, and probably my most proudest brainchild, is, like I mentioned a little earlier, Mu Delta Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which I founded here on this campus. And of course, it's a Muslim interest sorority, not limited to Muslims by any means. But when I joined Wichita State, I really, really, really wanted the Greek life experience. I heard a lot about what networking can do as a first-generation student. I thought I definitely need that. Professional development, I have no idea what that's supposed to look like. Absolutely, I would love it. And when I tried so hard to kind of find my home, I had a lot of trouble because while I think really some important aspects of Greek culture, especially with MGC, like the Multicultural Greek Council and a lot of the fraternities and sororities housed within that, I couldn't reconcile those aspects with being Muslim. That was really hard for me.
Yeah.
From, the wonderful Greek parties to strolling and stepping, I think I had a really hard time seeing myself as being a full member of those organizations because, of course, they're welcoming. Of course, they're family. But I think for me, it was really hard to see myself feel like, yes, I would feel like a complete member. And so when I started Mu Delta Alpha with the intention of making it a safe space and in a space to prioritize Muslim women, I found so much support on this campus. I didn't expect it. I'm not even going to lie. I didn't expect the support I got. But I got endless support from the campus community. And especially from everyone in Greek life, everyone made the intention and intentional step to say, you are welcome. We are so excited about what you're doing. And really, made me feel home. And I think when I started the organization, I was really scared. We don't have a very large Muslim population on campus. And of course, our Muslim Students Association has been inactive almost the entire time I've been at Wichita State. They were active my freshman year and then not after that. And so knowing that we were literally the only Muslim organization on campus, that was really daunting because I recognized that people would look to us for the Muslim experience, for figuring out, what needs to be done for Muslim students on campus, and that was a huge burden. It was a lot, but I think at the end of the day, being Muslim in this sorority and having the opportunity and the platform to be able to educate others was probably the biggest blessing to come out of my experience. And I think as a college student, in general, like besides my organizations and all of that, I think Islam is so personal. It's so personal, and college gives you the opportunity to grow in such beautiful ways. And I think as a person of faith, I think Islam rooted me deeply in my experience, and I started to appreciate the opportunities I got a lot more than I think I would have if I wasn't. I think also, I actually handled my losses, be it, getting bad grades or not winning, a particular award or whatever. Like, I started seeing everything as a blessing. Like, I didn't get it. Maybe there's something better in store for me. And even if it wasn't, this wasn't written for me, and that's okay.
I definitely commend you on taking the initiative to want to be a part of something, but acknowledging that you didn't feel comfortable in the way it was, so doing something to create your own space. Right. I definitely commend you, and I love the fact that you took that initiative for sure. And with that being said, when you think about that, there's definitely going to be a level of legacy left, right?
Right.
Being that something that you started, and as you kind of transition on to the next chapter of your academic career, what does that feel like? I'm assuming there's a level of pride there.
Absolutely.
What would you want that organization to look like 3-5 years from now?
That's a beautiful question. I think, of course, there's pride there. Of course. And I think this strong level also of humility. Like, I got here, we are here. Here I am at the end of my 4-year journey at Wichita State. But the work goes on. the work continues, and there's so much to recognize that it's not just me, it's the women that have been impacted by the organization, the women who will carry on the torch. And I think it makes me feel so humbled that people actually invested in this brainchild of mine, that people actually loved it as much as I did to continue it on. And so I really hope in the next, 3 to 5 years, 10 years down the line, that really not only the alumni or look back to say we did this, but also to pour back in.
Yeah.
I think Islam, and I think all faiths really are, we urge our communities to constantly serve and to give back, and Islam is no different. And so as Muslims, especially as Muslim women, it's our responsibility to give back, because honestly at this point no one is giving to us because they can't.
Yeah.
A lot of the times we are the trailblazers in our fields, professionally speaking, and I think that's okay. That's a blessing in and of its own, but it's a burden. And to lessen that burden, we've got to reach back. And I think really, my hopes really are from the alumni who will graduate, to say, here's what I've accomplished, here's how I can help you navigate, freshmen, sophomores, seniors, juniors, to say, this is how I navigated. Your path is of course different and unique, but here's what I've learned, and here's how you can avoid some of those pitfalls. And I think within the organization here on campus, I hope it grows.
Yeah.
I hope it flourishes, and I hope it continues to really set the blessing of Islam in a way that hopefully changes a lot of the narratives that go around in our communities about Muslims, about Islam, to say that, hopefully one day students coming off this campus can say, actually, whatever hate you're spewing is wrong. I've met some Muslims on campus. They do cool things on campus. They're really interesting people. Hopefully they're kind people. And hopefully to be able to set that tone. It's a huge burden. And I'm asking, generations, hopefully, of Muslim women to take on that burden, because it's a huge part of our faith, too, to make sure that we are people of good character. And so that the people of the community who are non-Muslim, or maybe are Muslim but have poor perceptions of Muslims, that, we are living out the values of our faith in a beautiful way.
So as we kind of come to a close, one of the things that I appreciate, and I wanted to do definitely for sure for this second season, is talk about some of these topics that are not often talked about, right?
Absolutely.
In this type of forum, and religion is definitely one of those. It's a hot topic, yet a lot of people they feel uncomfortable speaking about religion. And one of the things that you had said quite a bit most recently is that you were describing Muslim women, but you kept saying people, right? And I think that's one of the things that we all have in common. We're all people at the end of the day. And so being able to have those conversations about people who are different from us and people who have different experiences, and still to know and understand that we're all still people. And I think ultimately that should be that should be the one thing that we all have in common, is the fact that we're all trying to figure it out in our own ways, right?
Absolutely.
And so my last question to you is, why do you feel religion is one of those topics that people are just so uncomfortable to talk about?
I think the biggest fear that people have when talking about religion is that because religion is so personal and faith is so personal, that rather than, having a conversation about a difference of beliefs, it becomes so much more personal. It becomes a personal attack. And I think it's hard, really, even as a person of faith, it's hard for me to hear, for example, I'll just use myself. It's hard for me to hear criticism about Islam and about my beloved prophets, all of them, be it Jesus, be it Muhammad, peace be upon them both. And it's hard to hear slander. It's hard to hear people say, this is not the truth, when I firmly believe that this is the truth. And I think it's hard. How do you separate that? How do you if you're a person of faith, how do you sit there and separate yourself, from your guiding principles? And I think that's really hard. But I think at the same time, as people of faith and as people who maybe don't necessarily have a faith or are still trying to find faith, it's also important to say that keeping an open heart is not going to hurt you. Keeping an open heart is not going to hurt you, and that just because someone says something that might, hit a nerve or might, pull a heartstring, that it's important to be cognizant that when you're having an open and vulnerable conversation about religion, because that's really what it is, it's a vulnerable conversation, to make sure that the intent is never to hurt. Like, establish those ground rules to say, like, we will have this honest conversation about what we honestly think, and we will do our best not to, and it's not coming from malicious intent. And when you do that, when you clarify the intentions, because Islam, first of all, teaches us a lot about intention, and I think as someone coming from that background, intention must be established first. So, of course I can have a conversation with anybody and everybody, even someone who has left Islam, someone who is really, anti-Islam. I'm definitely willing to have those conversations if we can set the intention that we are not here to hurt. If we are not here to hurt and we are not here to slander, then of course ask all of your tough questions, ask all of your difficult points, bring up things that, make your soul uncomfortable. Like, what are those? There are some things even in Islam where I still have a hard time reconciling with. A lot of people ask, some really deep questions that make me think too. So I think as people of faith, when it comes to religion, or as people who are still exploring or not exploring, that set the intention. Because when you set the intention, then it's clear how the conversation can and will be received.
Well said, well said. Definitely, I just want to say thank you so much for taking
Absolutely.
time to come here and be so transparent and open and vulnerable. I truly appreciate you being with us today. And want to definitely express a sincere thank you to all of our listeners tuning in to Season 2. We really appreciate your support, and as always, we love to hear from you. So leave a comment, let us know what's on your mind. And if you are someone who has been keeping up with us for a while now and you find value in what we're doing, do us a favor and share this podcast with your friends. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and have a good one, and join us next time on Let's Talk About It.